Your brain is not broken. It's actually doing exactly what it was trained to do. The problem is, it was trained in a world that no longer exists. You lie awake running scenarios that probably won't happen. You replay conversations that ended days ago. You draft responses in your head to arguments nobody is having with you right now. And you cannot stop. Not because you're anxious, not because something is wrong, but because stopping never felt safe enough to practice. Here's the part most people get backwards. The people who think the most aren't the ones with the most problems. They're often the ones whose brains got exceptionally good very early at one specific thing, anticipating what comes next before it arrives. That skill saved them once, and it has not stopped saving them since, even when there's nothing left to save them from. Think about what overthinking actually looks like in practice. It's not dramatic. It's the text message you read 3 times, trying to figure out what the person really meant. It's the meeting you mentally rehearsed the night before. Every question, every answer. And then it went fine, and you still couldn't sleep because you were debriefing it. It's landing on the perfect response at 11 p.m. to something that ended at 4 in the afternoon. And here's what makes it genuinely hard to live with. It doesn't feel like suffering. It feels like thinking. The brain is engaged, active, working. And that sensation is close enough to productivity that you don't always notice you've been in the same loop for 2 hours. For most overthinkers, this didn't start recently. Researchers who study hypervigilance have found that chronic overthinking almost always has roots in early environments where unpredictability was the norm. Households where the emotional temperature shifted without warning, where reading the room wasn't a social skill, it was a survival skill. If you grew up in a space like that, your brain did something logical. It started scanning. It got good at picking up subtle cues. A shift in tone, a look that lasted a second too long, the particular silence that meant something was about to go wrong. It learned that if you could anticipate what was coming, you had a chance to prepare. That is not anxiety. That is intelligence in service of safety. The tragedy is just that the threat eventually disappeared. But the scanning never got the signal to stop. So here's the paradox at the center of all of this. The same cognitive machinery that makes someone an exceptional thinker, the pattern recognition, the attention to detail, holding multiple scenarios in mind at once, is the exact machinery that makes it nearly impossible to rest. A less active mind drifts toward quiet more easily. It doesn't chase threads. But a mind wired to notice everything doesn't get to choose which things to notice. Without a clear threat to focus on, it turns inward, auditing itself, replaying its own history looking for patterns it missed. Psychologists call this maladaptive rumination. The prefrontal cortex stays highly active even when there's no task. The default mode network keeps generating internal monologue. The result is a mind that never fully comes offline. And then there's dopamine. It's when your brain works through a problem, even one it's already worked through 15 times. It releases a small reward signal, not for finding an answer, just for the activity of thinking. So the loop becomes self-reinforcing. The thinking feels like progress because the brain is being rewarded just for running. This is why just stop thinking about it has never once helped anyone who actually needed it. Here's the part that changes things, and it's not what most people expect. Research published in Psychological Science found that people who report higher levels of rumination also score significantly higher on measures of cognitive empathy. They are more attuned to how words land, more aware of the unspoken emotional texture of a room, more accurate at predicting how someone else will react before they react. The engine that makes overthinking exhausting is the same engine that makes these people unusually perceptive. But there's a layer beneath this that almost never gets talked about. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA spent years studying what actually happens in the brain during rumination. What his research revealed is that for many chronic overthinkers, the thought loops aren't really about the thing they appear to be about. The mental rehearsals, the replays, the endless what-ifs, they function as a buffer. A way for the brain to stay occupied so it doesn't have to land on the actual feeling underneath. You're not overthinking to find the answer. You already have a version of it. You're overthinking because thinking is more tolerable than feeling what it means. Researchers call this an emotional avoidance loop. The mind substitutes cognitive activity for emotional processing, not out of weakness, but because at some point the emotional version of a problem felt too large to sit with. So the brain learned to approach it sideways, through logic, through one more pass. Lieberman's lab also found something immediately useful, simply naming what you're actually feeling, not journaling, not processing. Just the words, "I'm scared" or "I'm ashamed," measurably reduces activity in the amygdala. That single move creates enough distance between the feeling and the loop that the loop loses some of its pull. Not all of it, but some. And some is where it starts. Here's what's worth sitting with before we go any further. Most conversations about overthinking treat the thoughts as the problem. Stop the thoughts, fix the person. But the research points somewhere different. The thoughts are not the problem. The thoughts are the symptom. What's underneath? The feeling that's too uncomfortable to approach directly? The old nervous system still scanning for danger that left years ago? That's the actual territory. And no amount of thinking will resolve it, because thinking was never designed to do that job. Some things have to be felt, named, or allowed to pass through, not solved. The overthinker's instinct is to keep going. One more analysis, one more pass. The brain has a chemical incentive to do exactly that, and it is very convincing about the necessity of continuing. But the thought that feels most urgent is not always the one that most needs your attention. Sometimes the most useful thing a relentlessly active mind can do is stop mid-loop, name the actual emotion driving the spiral, not the subject of it, but the feeling underneath, and let that be enough for the moment. Not because it solves anything, because the brain needs to learn, slowly and through repetition, that it is allowed to stop. That stillness is not the same as vulnerability. If you're watching this late, phone in hand, everyone else asleep, brains still running on something that doesn't have a clear name, this is for you. You developed a mind that notices everything, that rehearses, anticipates, prepares. You probably saved yourself more than once by thinking ahead, by reading the room, by seeing what was coming before anyone else did. Nobody taught you to do that. You figured it out on your own, in a context where it mattered, when you were young enough that it became automatic. And now it runs whether you need it or not. That's not a character flaw. It's a nervous system that learned to stay alert in an environment that kept changing without warning, and never received a clear signal that the environment had changed. You are not broken. You are a fast brain in a situation that no longer requires that speed, trying to figure out how to slow down without feeling like you're falling. What it responds to, according to both the research and the people who've done this work, is patience, repetition, and the quiet practice of naming what you actually feel instead of thinking around it. Your brain learned to run to protect you. The next thing it needs to learn is that you're finally safe enough to rest. If this put words to something you've been carrying, share it with someone who'd recognize themselves in it.